Good day, grade 11 learners. Welcome to today's life science lesson. My name is Shabnam Sukhnandan. This lesson is proudly brought to you by Sci-Bono Discovery Center in collaboration with the Gauteng Department of Education. So learners, today's lesson we're going to focus on gaseous exchange, and we're going to look at basically the functioning of the gaseous exchange system. Now, to start off with, remember revision from the last lesson, we need to look at the ventilation of the lungs. And you know, ventilation simply means when you have the window open, ventilation, for there to be cross movement in and out of the room, you have air. So ventilation of the lungs simply means the process of breathing, which is a mechanical process, right? So you can see it happening. So the process of breathing is a mechanical process whereby air moves in from the atmosphere, and then air will move out of the lungs as a result of differences in the atmospheric air pressure and the air pressure inside the lungs. So because of the difference in pressure between the atmosphere and the lungs and the atmosphere, air is able to move into the lungs from the outside and out of the lungs to the outside due to this air pressure difference. So basically, how does this breathing or mechanical process occur? It involves different muscles and the volume and the pressure changes in the thoracic cavity. Now learners, remember that this entire part of your chest, that means your rib cage, which encloses and protects your lungs, and this little structure here just above your stomach, right? So that muscle called the diaphragm, and your chest just below your neck, so from below your neck to just above your stomach, that is actually called your thorax. And the cavity or hollow part inside where the lungs are found is called the thoracic cavity. So remember the first slide, let's summarize it. We take air in from the outside because the pressure is high. Air always moves from high to low pressure. So in the atmosphere, the air pressure is high. And because the air pressure is high, air will move, when you breathe in, air will move from the outside via the nostrils up your throat, right? And then going down that little tube pipe called the trachea into your lungs. Now inside your lungs, the pressure is going to be high. And then when you breathe out, the high pressure is going to cause the air to force out of the lungs. So when you exhale, you find that this muscle moves up, and because the space is smaller compared to this space, can you see that when you inhaling, the volume of your thoracic cavity is greater, top to bottom, left to right, whereas when you're exhaling, can you see the space? The space or volume has decreased from top to bottom compared to that line. See, the line has decreased, and even the side to side, the volume or space has decreased. So the most important part of this slide or this presentation is that when we breathe, there are two processes, inhalation and exhalation. Together it's called ventilation. And what causes the air to move in? It's because of the high pressure outside. That will, as you're breathing in, air will move in with oxygen, because now the volume of the lungs have increased in size, more space. And therefore, because there's more space, there's going to be less pressure. So air moves from a high pressure from the outside to the lungs where there is a low pressure. And then when you exhale, you find the muscles will move up, and then the space within your thoracic cavity will decrease, get less, and because the space is less, the pressure becomes higher and it forces the air outside. So this is basically the process of breathing. It's a mechanical process because you can see it, you can see the movement. When somebody is fast asleep and if you want to know, are they alive or are they dead, you'll be able to see the movement of the rib cage. You'll be able to see the movement of the thorax. That's why it's mechanical. And remember, air moves in and it moves out of the lungs. Why? Because of the difference in atmospheric air pressure and the difference in the pressure inside the lungs. Those are the key words to the ventilation of the lungs. Also, another important thing is because of the muscles involved in breathing, and they create space, which we call volume. How the muscles move will affect the volume or the space, and the more the space, the less the pressure. So if you're in a small room, you'll feel more pressure. If you're in a big room, you'll feel less pressure. So the volume of the thoracic cavity, when it increases, the pressure will decrease. And when the volume of the lungs of the thoracic cavity increases, the pressure will decrease. And when the volume decreases, the pressure will increase in the lung. And that's what causes the movement of air into and out of the lung. Right. Now you need to know that there are two places where gaseous exchange occurs. And learners, please do not confuse the word gaseous exchange, breathing, and respiration. Many people think that breathing is respiration, and many people think that gaseous exchange is breathing. Right. The gaseous exchange simply means, if you look at it, exchange of gases. Gases are exchanged, right, from one place to the next. And where does it happen? In two areas of the body. Right. First of all, there's gaseous exchange at the alveoli surface. We'll see what's an alveolus just now. And we see gaseous exchange occurring between the blood and the tissues. Right. So there are two places where gases are exchanged, between the lungs and the blood, and between the blood and the cells of the tissues. Remember in grade 10 you learned that many cells makes up tissues? Yes. So the gases, which are the oxygens and the carbon dioxides, will move from lung to blood, from blood to cells, from cells to blood, from blood to lungs, and out again. So these are the two areas in the body where gases are exchanged. We'll come to know what is an alveoli in the next slide. Right, so children, here are some terminology. You need to know the terminology, because without knowing the proper terminology, you will not be able to construct good biological sentences. So remember now, these words are found in the context of your gaseous exchange system. The word diaphragm, remember here, it's a tricky spelling. Dia and then phragm is like P-H-R-A-G-M. So the P-H is silent and it's more like diaphragm. So, but the spelling has to be correct, because if you spell it as diagram, diagram means something completely different. So although we may know what you are saying, but because it's spelled incorrectly and it means something else, it will be marked incorrect. So you need to know the spelling, and the more you read your work, automatically you will know the spelling. So what is the diaphragm? Now if you look at a person here, you can see that's the head part, that's your neck, and then from below your neck to just above the stomach, this part is called your thorax. That's your thorax. You have a head, neck, thorax, and everything below that is your abdomen. So in the thoracic cavity, if you were to become a doctor and you have to now dissect a person, right, then you need to know exactly where the lungs are. It's not in the neck, it's not in the stomach, it's not in the abdomen. You need to know it's in the thorax. So that's the thoracic cavity. And what normally protects it, what cannot be seen in this diagram, is a rib cage. You know, you can feel your ribs, right? And just in the middle bone of your ribs, what you learned in grade 10, your sternum. Just behind the sternum, you'll find the heart. And on either side of the heart, you find the lungs. So here is your two lungs, right? And they are lobed. Remember, they have a lobes. Your right lung is actually bigger than your left lung. Reason is that the left lung actually is taken up because of the heart points to the left. So the left lung looks smaller. It has two lobes. And you find that your right lung actually has three lobes. there's more space for the lung. So here's your lung, and just below the lung you have this muscle here. This is the muscle. This muscle here is called the diaphragm. See, it's dome shaped. It's like a dome, like an arch. So the diaphragm is a dome shaped muscle that separates the chest, my chest, your thorax, from the abdomen, and it's involved in breathing. So your diaphragm is a muscle that helps you to bring air in and to push air out, because it must contract and relax. Remember, learners, that any muscle must contract and relax to bring about movement. So the diaphragm is what? A dome-shaped muscle. What does it do? It's involved in breathing. That is its function. Sorry, by contracting and relaxing. It also separates your thorax from the abdomen. Right. Now we need to know what are the words inhalation and exhalation. When you're looking at the word inhalation, it means breathing air in. So you know you do that all the time. While you are busy doing things, automatically you are breathing in and you're breathing out. All the time you are doing that. If you don't do that, you'll be dead. So therefore you find that inhalation means breathing air in and exhalation means breathing air out. Exhalation simply means exit, that means out, and inhalation means air coming in. So here is the structure of your lungs. Now you're going to look at the actual mechanical process of inhalation. Right. So you need to know this because you will be tested and then you will have to take, you can actually tabulate, right? You need to know exactly the steps involved in inhalation. The steps cannot be mixed up. So learners, you need to swat it off and you need to learn it in conjunction with your diagram. Right. So here is a little annotation to show you, illustration to show air coming in, moves via the trachea, that is the little pipe there, and on either side is your lungs. You can see your heart in the middle. Here's your diaphragm, it moves down, right? So when your diaphragm relaxes, it moves down, and then there's more space, and you find on the side of your lungs, there are also muscles attached to your ribs. So here is your rib cage, okay? And you find on your rib cage on the side, there are intercostal muscles. So to actually illustrate exactly what is an intercostal muscles, if you are eating chops from a sheep, the meat, the chops, the actual chops or meat is actually the intercostal muscle of the sheep. And the actual rib bone that's there, that is the rib of the sheep. So same thing with humans. That is the intercostal muscle and that is the rib. And because it's the intercostal muscle, it's going to contract and relax and helps the rib cage to move up and down, upwards and downwards. Right, so that's the intercostal muscle. What's the other muscle? Here's your diaphragm. So those two muscles are called breathing muscles. The intercostal muscles and the diaphragm are the two breathing muscles involved in gaseous exchange. And the ribs are there basically to protect the lungs. So now, let us look at the process of inhalation. What exactly happens? So during inhalation, when air moves into the lungs, what happens to the diaphragm? So when air moves into the lungs, the diaphragm will contract, okay? It's going to contract and it moves down. So the diaphragm contracts and it moves down. It will move down. Okay, so when you contract, you see, it's contracting and it moves down, right? Then what happens to the intercostal muscles? The intercostal muscles between the ribs also contract. So both muscles, when they contract, the rib cage will move up and out, and when the diaphragm contracts, it will move down. And what happens now? Because the rib cage is moving up and out and the diaphragm is moving down, the space within the thoracic cavity where the lungs are found is going to increase. The space, the volume is going to increase. So when the intercostal muscles contract between the ribs, the rib cage moves upwards and pushes outwards, up and out. That's where you can see the person is breathing, because the rib cage moves up and out, down and in, up and out, down and in. Right. Now, once that happens, once the rib cage moves up and out and the diaphragm moves down, the air pressure inside the lungs are very low compared to outside. So the air pressure in the lungs decreases. Why? Because the space is more, the volume increases. And therefore, the outside air pressure is greater. Air pressure is greater than the pressure inside the lungs. Okay? And the air will now flow in. The air is going to flow in. Inhalation is an active process. Why is inhalation called an active process? It's active simply because the muscles are contracting and air is moving in. Okay, it's an active because of the muscle contraction. Let us summarize this. It's very, very simple. Right. What is inhalation? Air containing oxygen, because there's oxygen in the air. Remember, when you did photosynthesis in plants, it is the plants that bring oxygen on Earth, on the planet Earth. Without oxygen, every single thing will die. Even the cells will die and cause cancer. So plants are valuable. Do not destroy plants. Tell the people around you, do not burn felt fires. Do not cut trees. If you cut a tree, make sure you plant, because you're going to carry on cutting. How are you going to get more trees and twigs in future to build houses? From where are you going to get it if there's no trees? So every time you cut one tree, you've got to plant at least 3 more trees for the future. So inhalation involves inhaling air containing oxygen. How does air move? Air moves from a high pressure outside into the lungs. Right. When the air moves in, you find the diaphragm will contract and move down, and the intercostal muscles will contract and the rib cage moves up and out. Okay? And then the volume of the thoracic cavity is going to increase, and because the volume of the thoracic cavity is increasing, there's more space. Because there's more space inside the thoracic cavity, the air pressure inside is low. So therefore, during inhalation, air moves from a high pressure outside to a low pressure inside the lungs. Because the intercostal muscles contract, rib cage moves up and out, diaphragm contracts, more volume is found inside the thoracic cavity, and air moves from a high to a low pressure, and air comes into the lungs. So that is involved in, that is actually inhalation. And why is it an active process? Because muscles are contracting. Now we look at exhalation. It's going to be the complete opposite. How will air move out, exit your lungs? So here you can see in this diagram, it's showing you how your diaphragm is actually moving up. So it's pushing against the lungs. So when the diaphragm now will relax, it goes back to its normal dome shape. See, when you exhale, the diaphragm is relaxed. When it's relaxed, it goes back to its dome shape. It's no more flattened. It's dome shaped. And it looks like it's pushing against the lungs. So the pressure in the lungs is going to increase. Your rib cage, your intercostal muscles will now also relax. Then the rib cage moves down and in. So because the rib cage is moving down and in, and the diaphragm is moving up, what's happening? The volume in the thoracic cavity will, the space will decrease, but the pressure on the lungs will increase, and air will move from a high pressure in the lungs and then out to the outside, to the atmosphere. But that air that comes out of the lungs will contain what? Carbon dioxide. Remember, we did respiration, and we said respiration is a chemical process because it involves what? The breakdown of glucose with oxygen to give you CO2 that's released as a waste. So that waste of CO2 coming from all your cells, that CO2 can't stay in the body, so it's going to be exhaled via exhalation. So let's read it again. Exhalation is when air moves out of the lungs. What happens then? How does that happen? The diaphragm relaxes and moves upwards, becomes dome shaped, moves upwards. The intercostal muscles will also relax. The rib cage moves down and in. See? The air pressure in the lungs now will increase. There's more pressure in the lungs because the space is small. So the air pressure in the lungs will increase, whereas the air pressure in the outside is low, because now the air pressure inside is high, but the air pressure outside is low. Air is forced out. The air will be forced out. And exhalation is a passive process. So it's passive, where your muscles are now relaxed. So here is your process of exhalation, and you can see here, right, that here the air is moving in. You can see your intercostal muscles will relax, the rib cage moves in, your diaphragm is moving up, and the space decreases. So all you have to say is, during exhalation, the intercostal muscles and the diaphragm relaxes. The volume in the thoracic cavity will decrease. The air pressure in the lungs will increase, and air containing CO2 is forced out of the lungs. Now, learners, this is a simple model which your teachers can tell you to actually make using a Coke bottle. You can use a straw, and you can use a balloon to actually demonstrate the model of how gaseous exchange occurs, or how the system of breathing occurs, using a simple model. Right. So you can design your own little, like this can be a plastic bottle, a Coke bottle. You cut the bottom, and then you can simply put a piece of plastic at the bottom and then tie it with a rubber band. So you can take a Coke bottle, right, like that, and then here's your bottle. You cut the bottle and you simply put like a little plastic like that, and make sure that it's tied there and it's tied there, right? And then you take your lid, you put the lid on the bottle. You can make a little opening, right, with a hot like an iron, and then make an opening here like that, and then insert a straw, and then you can put a piece of straw also coming there and there, right, and then you tie little balloons on the straws, and those two balloons will represent your lungs, and the straw will represent your trachea, and this part of the straw outside will represent your larynx, where air actually moves in your larynx. That's your larynx, and then that's your trachea, okay, and then you find that's your lungs. Then this little plastic sheet will represent your diaphragm, and your two balloons will represent your lungs, and then you can put a little like a stick there to pull the plastic up and down, and when you push it up it will be exhalation. When you pull it down it will demonstrate to you inhalation. So let us see this model here. It's often tested in the exam. That now is a glass tube, right? So it's quite rigid and firm. A glass tube, that's a rubber stopper, okay? And then here is one balloon which is representing your lung, right? And now you can see that's a rubber sheet, like a rubber, or you can use plastic. And then if you put a little like a hook there, and if you pull or you push the little clip up, can you see the up? Can you see that the rubber sheet is now dome shaped? It's dome shaped, okay? And what's going to happen? The volume here is going to decrease, and more air pressure, and it's going to force the air out. Can you see the balloon deflated? And then if you pull this rubber sheet down, it becomes flatter. You pull it down, there's going to be more space top to bottom, and then the volume is going to increase, the pressure on your lungs will decrease, and air will flow in here. Can you see how the balloon has inflated? So now for this, the questions for each of the model parts listed below. Provide an appropriate name for the corresponding part in the human respiratory system. So this is a model to demonstrate breathing. But what are the real parts it will represent in our body? Now, what will the glass tube represent? The glass tube will represent this tube which takes air from the nostrils to the lung, which is called the trachea. Here, we're having it as a glass tube. So the glass tube represents your trachea. What do the balloons represent? Your lungs. What does the bell jar, this jar or the Coke bottle represent? Your rib cage. Okay? Yeah, it represents your rib cage or your chest, your thoracic cavity. Your rib cage with the thoracic cavity. That's what it represents. Your rib cage, and there's also obviously this hollow part here is your thoracic cavity. And what does the rubber sheet represent? It represents your diaphragm. Remember, in reality, your diaphragm is a muscle and that it is dome-shaped. Dome, like an arch. Same diagram, again, different questions now. Does diagram B represent an active or a passive process in the human mechanism of breathing? To identify the diagram, remember, if you see that the balloon, now this is B, they want to know, does diagram B show you inhalation or exhalation? Right, get that answer. Then you must know, is it active or passive? So remember, if the balloon is inflated, it means inhalation. And what did we say? When we breathe in, our muscles contract. And when it contracts, it's an active process. So B, you find the answer is saying that it's an active process. Why? My lungs have inflated. My balloon has inflated. It means my diaphragm moved down. My intercostal muscles cause my ribcage to move out. My pressure in the lungs is going to be low. My volume is high. My muscles, diaphragm and intercostal muscles contracted. Because they contracted in inhalation, it's an active process. What happens to the air pressure in the bell jar at B? Remember, for your lungs to inflate, what must happen? There must be space. There must be increased volume. When the volume is increased, the pressure will decrease. Remember, it's always the opposite. And remember that if you are in a small room and everything is crowding on you, you'll feel under more pressure because the space is less. So, and then you want to move out. You want to get out. Same thing. Think of it that way. When it's exhalation, what happens? Exhalation, the pressure is going to be high inside and air is forced out. Inhalation, the balloon is inflated, air pressure is low, volume is high, and air will move in. So what happens to the air pressure at B? Always label this before. You must know this means inhalation. My balloons are inflated. This one here is exhalation. My balloon is deflated. And when your pressure is low, your lung lungs will inflate, okay? Because they have space. The air pressure is going to be low and then there's going to be more space. So the lungs will increase in size. Right. Same diagram again. What happens to the volume? What is volume? The space, the size, the space in the bell jar at B. The space is going to increase. Remember, learners, volume is space, and the space during inhalation increases in your thoracic cavity. What you see as restrictions to the models when comparing them to the actual human body? Mention two possible limitations of the model. A limitation means what could be two possible disadvantages or something that you cannot really see in this model that happens in reality? Now, the two disadvantages is that the bell jar does not move, but the lungs do. So you remember, in reality, when we breathe in, we can see the rib cage moving up and out. But because the bell jar is a glass jar or a plastic, it doesn't move up and down. So in the bell jar, it does not show you the movement of the rib cage. Okay? And then the model demonstrates only one lung, whereas we have two lungs. So here you can see just one lung, whereas we have two lungs. So this model has those limitations. It's not showing you the reality of the breathing process. Okay, so that is a limitation. Now this is what we call a spirometer. Okay, a spirometer is simply whereby if a person has a lung disease and they want to test whether your lungs are able to expand enough to take in air and to blow out air, then they will tell a person to blow out air and then blow as much air out to keep these three little balls floating. So if you try and the ball cannot move up, it means that you are unable to push air out. So the lungs are not really working well. Your muscles are not working well. Like this person now, if he blows air and that ball is right to the top, his lungs are working perfectly. But if he's trying to blow air and this one doesn't even want to move, it means that his lungs are diseased. The muscles are unable to contract and relax and force the air upwards. Okay, so what is the instrument used to measure the volume of air in the lungs? It's actually called a spirometer. It's an instrument used to measure the volume of air that enters and leaves the lungs during inhalation and exhalation. So they will tell you to breathe in first, hold, and then breathe out. And then you got to keep that ball up for a while, and then the minute you exhale, it will fall down. And then you got to do that again. And if you can constantly do that and the ball moves up immediately, it means that your lungs are quite healthy, your intercostal muscles and diaphragm is working well. So this is what we call a spirometer. Now, functions of the lungs, functions of the gaseous exchange system. Remember that the main function of the gaseous exchange system in humans is to take oxygen from the air into the lungs. There's only two things that keeps every living thing on earth alive, and that is glucose, which we get from food, and we get that food from plants, and the other thing that we need is oxygen, which we get from plants. And they make all of that. They make the oxygen and food by photosynthesis. So in life sciences, all processes are interconnected. If one process fails, then the other one would fail. In other words, learners, if there's no glucose and there's no oxygen, then your body won't get energy, and without oxygen, all your cells can die, and that's what actually causes cancer. So our lungs are designed for one purpose: to bring air with oxygen from the air outside to the lungs, give it to the heart. Heart must pump all that oxygen to all the cells of your body. Where to? To the mitochondria for respiration. Then, after oxygen breaks down the glucose in your mitochondria, you get energy and you release CO2 as a waste product which cannot stay in the body. Then that CO2 from all your cells after respiration must come from your cells to the blood, from the blood to the heart. From the heart, it must pump the CO2 to your lungs. And what do? You exhale the CO2, which the plants absorb. Remember, when people are burning felt fires, they are using oxygen. They're using the valuable oxygen that we're supposed to use and breathe. We are not the only people on earth that needs to live, not only humans. Birds, insects, animals also need that oxygen. And by actually you burning unnecessary felt fires, they're using the valuable oxygen that humans and other animals and plants need. Even plants themselves need the oxygen that they produce. So felt fires, try to tell people not to burn. If you see a felt fire, try to put it off. Put that felt fire off, because it's consuming the oxygen that we're supposed to breathe as humans. It's causing pollution with the smoke and all the black soot. So children, our lungs, when we are going to inhale smoke and dust and less oxygen, eventually it's going to cause diseases in our body. So our main function of the lung is to be healthy, to take clean air, not smoky air. Clean air with oxygen in, go to the heart, heart pumps the oxygen to the cells, cells use the oxygen during respiration, then give off CO2 as a waste, which we remove and exhale. And then it's those very same plants that will take that CO2 and use it again for photosynthesis to make food. So without the plants, we will all die. We won't have food and we won't have oxygen. So remember, the main function of gaseous exchange in humans is to take oxygen from the air into the lungs during inhalation, air moving in. Right. This oxygen-rich air reaches the alveoli where gaseous exchange takes place. So once the oxygen comes in with the air into the lungs, now learners, remember that here is your trachea and here are the two bronchi. Right, you must have done that in the previous lesson. These are the two bronchi that come from the trachea. When this bronchi is infected with bacteria that come from the air that's polluted, you get bronchitis, where now mucus is going to be produced and stops the air from moving in. You have difficulty in breathing. So this is called the bronchus. One bronchus, many bronchi. And then you're going to have your lungs. So when you're looking at your lungs, you look at it like a whole balloon. But actually, our lungs looks like a bunch of grapes. Where you have in grapes a small twig and lots of these round little things like this. Those round little pouches like that. Okay? That is called an alveoli. One alveolus and all those small sacs are called alveoli. So that is the alveoli. So all the air with oxygen goes into the alveoli. Many alveoli makes up a lung. It goes into these small little sacs, and each sac is like rounded with a thin little membrane for oxygen to move through it into the blood. Right. So the function of the gaseous exchange system, that air containing oxygen enters the lungs, and where does it go into? It goes into the small little pouches called alveoli. Then from the alveoli, the oxygen will diffuse. How does it move? It does not walk. It diffuses. We say it moves from a high concentration to a low concentration. So there's going to be more oxygen in the lung and less oxygen in the blood. So because here there's a high concentration of oxygen in the lung and there's a low concentration of oxygen in the blood, the oxygen will move from a high concentration to a low concentration. This difference is called a diffusion gradient. A diffusion gradient is the difference between two things. So between the alveolus in the lung and the blood, there's lots of oxygen because oxygen comes from the source into the lung and less in the blood, so it will diffuse. So the oxygen diffuses into the blood, and then from the blood it will go to the heart. What is the heart there for? That's why the heart is here in the middle of the lung. So immediately see how our body is designed. that the lungs are close to the heart. So the minute the oxygen goes into the lungs, from there all the blood capillaries takes it to the heart, which is not far off. And that heart must quickly send that oxygen that we inhale to all the cells of the body. So the oxygen diffuses into the blood, to the cells of the body. So from the blood, that comes from the heart transports it to all the cells. It then receives carbon dioxide from the cells of the body after cellular respiration to be expelled out via exhalation. So remember, there's two things that's happening. We are taking oxygen from the air into the lungs, from the lungs to the blood, from the blood to the heart. Heart pumps the oxygen to all the cells. After the oxygen is used up, the cells give off CO2, and the CO2 comes from the blood, and then it's going to go from the blood. The CO2 is going to come here and go into the lungs, and we will exhale it. So if I must draw the trachea here in the exam paper, and if they have an arrow in and out, and here's your lungs, and they ask you a label number 1 and 2 as a process. 1 will be exhalation as a process. 2 will be inhalation as a process. But if they ask you what gas is represented by number 1, the gas moving out, then that will be CO2, and the gas moving in, then that will be oxygen. So always look at what is my question asking me for. Is it asking me for a process, or is it asking me for a gas? Is it asking me for a muscle, or is it asking me for an active process? They can put 1 and 2 and say which process is demonstrating an active process. And you know that when air moves in and muscles contract, that is number 2, it's going to be an active process. You know when air moves out, that the muscles are relaxed and pushing the air out, that is a passive process. So always look at the question and what exactly is it asking you. So learners, here is a diagram of the alveoli. You can see here is our trachea, or part of the trachea is on top, and then it branches off into your bronchi. You see this little tube here in brown, that is your bronchi, the bronchus, and the finer ones are called bronchioles. And when these bronchioles are actually infected with mucus because of germs, then mucus, then you cough, 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 and all the green stuff that comes is coming from your bronchioles. Here's your trachea, the big tube, the windpipe, and then it branches off into this one and this one. See your trachea here with these cartilaginous rings which supports it, so it must never ever collapse. And then is your bronchus, which are these two. See, that's your bronchus there. And then from your bronchus, you can see smaller tubes, smaller ones going like this. Then that one is your bronchioles. There they are, like branches of a tree. Can you see how the lungs, they look like trees? Because trees give us oxygen. So the lung actually has these structures which look like bunches of grapes, like a grape tree. Okay, all the little twigs and all the little round little things, that is the alveoli. So that is the lungs. So all the alveoli make up your lung, right? And you can see a magnified view of that one little pouch there, right? They magnified it to say, here's a bronchiole and all my air sacs called my alveoli. There's it. And oxygen diffuses into each one. Now, when person smokes cigarette very, very often, and dacha, that cigarette and that nicotine clogs up these little air sacs or alveoli so much that they begin to die and collapse and get a hole in there. And then the person suffers from emphysema, where air can't move in and out. You can't take air in, you can't push air out, so basically you can't breathe, and the person dies eventually, unless they have a lung transplant. So here's the structure of the lung. Trachea, bronchus, bronchioli, and all those round sacs are called what? The alveoli. Together, the whole thing, this whole bunch, one alveolus, but the whole bunch like this. See, that's an alveolus sac, but this whole bunch is called an infundibulum. This is an infundibulum, a bunch of air sacs, all right? So here's your alveolus, here's your bronchiole. You will be asked to label a simplified diagram, and you can see all the blood capillaries. A healthy lung will look pink against all the alveoli. So all these are your blood capillaries, so that oxygen can move from the lung to the blood, and CO2 can move from the blood to the lung. All the time that is happening. So that is an exchange of gases. Gases are exchanged between the lung and the blood, lung and blood, and between blood and lung. That is your gaseous exchange. Now we are seeing a lined diagram of one alveolus, just one alveolus, one air sac like that, like a small balloon, right? So they cut the balloon open and they're saying, okay, let us see what is making up the wall of it. And here it is. So this wall is actually, here it is. Here's the wall of the alveolus. Can you see? This one here. There's the wall of the alveolus. So air, this red arrows are showing you air flowing in, inhalation, which contains oxygen. You can see all the red is oxygen. There's more oxygen in the alveolus than the blood. This here is what? This is a blood capillary, a diagram that's very famous in all exam papers. So you can see your blood capillary here, like a little border, right? And you can see when that is the alveolus, and then that is the blood capillary. Now in the alveolus, you'll see arrows. Arrows coming in the alveolus will show oxygen, and it's moving from the alveolus through this thin little lining, which is called your squamous epithelium, which you learned in grade 10, that is a squamous epithelium. It's very thin, so gases can move rapidly and easily from the alveolus through the thin epithelium, through the epithelium of the blood vessel, and into your red blood cells. So what carries oxygen in our blood is what we call red blood cells. Red blood cells, they also call them erythrocytes. You'll also get that word in the exams. Erythrocytes carry your oxygen. So let's see, air coming in has oxygen, high concentration of oxygen in the alveolus, low concentration of oxygen in the blood. Because of this diffusion gradient, oxygen moves from a high concentration through the thin squamous epithelium of the alveolus, through the single squamous epithelium of your blood capillary into your red blood cells. And in your red blood cells now we have a pigment called hemoglobin. Okay, and hemoglobin is the one, hemoglobin. Hem is actually iron, and globin is actually a protein. So in what form does our oxygen travel in the blood? Our oxygen will travel in the form called oxyhemoglobin, and that what makes our blood bright red in color. So if you have bright red blood, it means that your blood has a lot of oxygen, because the hemoglobin will not, it will turn dark without oxygen. So that iron, you need iron. So that is why people who have low levels of iron become anemic, and they faint because they don't have enough oxygen going to the cells for respiration to give them energy. So those people faint, they feel weak because they're anemic. They are pale because they don't have a pink bright color, because they don't have enough hemoglobin to carry the oxygen that they are inhaling. So remember, in our red blood cells, what do we have? hemoglobin. And hemoglobin carries oxygen to give our blood cells its reddish color. Right, there's your little red blood cells. See, your erythrocytes. They are bright red because they're carrying oxygen. They are bright red because they have hemoglobin to carry the oxygen. And there's lots of oxygen here, 1, 2, 3, 4 cells, more oxygen, and then the oxygen would leave. It will leave the lungs as a blood through this capillary to go to the pulmonary vein, which goes to the heart. And the heart will pump that oxygen via the aorta to all cells of the body. Remember, you did this earlier when you did the heart, right? You must remember you have the aorta, which is the largest blood vessel. It's going to bring oxygen from the lungs and transport it to all parts of the body. So here it is. So learners, the minute you see the arrow moving out of the blood capillary, you must remember that arrow is showing you oxygenated blood. This is oxygenated blood, this one that moves out. And it's going where? To the pulmonary vein of the heart. Now, what blood is coming to the lungs? Blood coming to the lungs must carry the CO2 from all the cells. So the blood coming to the lungs, it's blood with a high concentration of carbon dioxide. And it comes from the pulmonary artery. Eventually it will branch into small capillaries, and then it's bringing carbon dioxide. Can you see it's blue? Because carbon dioxide makes the blood dark. So the carbon dioxide is coming to the blood. Now there's more carbon dioxide in the blood compared to the lungs on this side. A high concentration of carbon dioxide in the blood compared to the lungs. Diffusion gradient, the difference, and then CO2 moves from your blood through the epithelium, through the squamous epithelium to the lungs, and we exhale it. So this blue arrow is showing you exhalation. It's showing you CO2 leaving. This red arrow is showing you inhalation. It's showing you oxygen that is entering. And you can see, what are these arrows showing you? Gaseous exchange between the blood and the alveolus of the lung. So what is this diagram showing you? Gaseous exchange between the alveolus in the lung and the blood. Oxygen moves from the alveolus to the blood. CO2 moves from the blood to the alveolus. Where is that oxygen coming from? From the air outside, inhalation. Where is the CO2 coming from? From respiration from all the cells in your body. CO2 is a waste product. It cannot stay in your body. It must be removed. And the only way is for the blood to bring it from your cells to the heart. The heart must pump it to the lungs, and our lungs will exhale that CO2. What are some important words that we need to know here? Red blood cells are called erythrocytes. What form is oxygen carried in? In the form of oxyhemoglobin. What is hemoglobin? It's a pigment. Hemoglobin is let's just erase this one here. So hemoglobin is a pigment inside your red blood cells. It's a pigment. So in the question, if they say, name the pigment which carries oxygen, it's hemoglobin. The form in which oxygen is carried, oxyhemoglobin. Name the blood cells that carry oxygen. You can say red blood cells. The proper biological name for red blood cells, erythrocytes. Okay. Name the gases that move from the alveolus to the blood, oxygen. Name the gas that moves from the blood to the alveolus, carbon dioxide. What type of blood leaves the lung? You can't say oxygen. What type of blood leaves the lung is blood rich in oxygen, which becomes oxygenated blood. What type of blood enters the lung? It is deoxygenated blood. No oxygen. Oxygen is removed. It has CO2. So blood entering the lung is deoxygenated blood. Okay. Remember, normally veins, all veins carry blood rich with carbon dioxide, deoxygenated blood. The only vein, so you'll see your blood, your veins, you'll always see your veins as being blue. Those blue veins everywhere is carrying deoxygenated blood in your veins. That's why they're like greenish, bluish green. The only vein that will be bright red is the pulmonary vein that leaves the lung. That one is the only vein in the body that will be bright red. All other veins will be bluish green because they carry deoxygenated blood. All arteries normally are bright red because they carry all oxygenated blood. The only artery that will be not be dark, it won't be red, but it will be like a dullish blue, will be your pulmonary artery. That one is bringing deoxygenated blood, not oxygen. That's why it's not going to be bright red. Okay, learners, we will revise that later again. Here you can see the same diagram here. That air inhaled has less carbon dioxide. This results in oxygen diffusing from the alveolus into the blood and carbon dioxide moving from the blood to the alveolus. Okay, so to simplify this whole thing, again you see your alveolus, you see your blood capillary, you see that the blood coming to the lung has more CO2, and therefore the CO2 will go from the blood to the lung, and you find that the blood that leaves the lung will take oxygen from the lung. So the blood leaving the lung will have more oxygen. So blood entering the lung has more CO2 and less oxygen. Blood leaving the lung will have more oxygen and less CO2. So that's deoxygenated blood. The CO2 leaves and goes into the lung, and then it becomes oxygenated. So deoxygenated blood becomes now oxygenated because the CO2 leaves, it's exchanged, it goes from the blood to the lungs, and we're going to exhale it, it's gone. And now this blood is lacking CO2, it's lacking, it doesn't have it, there's a deficit, it's no longer there. So the D, that means no oxygen, no CO2 there. I mean, there's no more CO2, now there's oxygen. So this becomes your oxygenated blood. Here's your oxygen. Right. And you can see only two cellular layers separates. There's only a single cellular layer of the alveolus and a single cellular layer of the blood. Only two single cells. See? Only one cell thick. That means just one cell thick, not like a double layer of bricks. It's not like that. No, it's just a single layer of cells from the alveolus and a single layer of cells from the endo. You see? So it's not like the blood capillary has two layers and the alveolus will also have two layers. No, it's just a single layer of cells of the alveolus and a single layer of cells of the blood capillaries, and that's the only two layers that's separating the air in the lungs from the blood in the blood capillary. Okay, so the air in the lungs from the blood in the blood capillary is separated by two single layers, and that's why it becomes very thin, so gases can move through they can be exchanged very, very quickly. Please know the labels of this diagram. They can put 1, 2, 3, 4. They can put A, B, C. They can ask you to give the label for this diagram. They can ask you to draw the diagram. What is it showing you? Gases exchange between the alveolus and the blood. That's what it's showing you. Right. That's the air sac. We also call the alveolus the air sac. One air sac, one alveolus. Many air sacs are called an infundibulum. A small tube containing air sacs is a bronchiole, the small tube. The main tube coming to the lung is the trachea. The two branches of the trachea is your bronchus. Finer branches, bronchioles. One little air sac, alveolus. A bunch of air sacs, infundibulum. Okay. Now we are seeing what happens now when the blood containing oxygen leaves the lung. Where must it go? To the heart. Now the heart will pump out the blood through the aorta, a big artery, and that aorta will now branch off into finer tubes called capillaries. So the capillaries will take the oxygen that came from the lung, that came to the heart, from the heart to the capillaries, and pump it way to all these cells. So these little pink things are the cells of our body. The small little parts that make up our system are called cells. All the cells in the body. These could be cells of your skin, cells of your eye, cells of your bones, cells of your cartilage. Every single cell in your body now. Here they are. And what is each one doing? Each one is undergoing cellular respiration, using oxygen, using glucose to give the cells energy to do their work, and then that organ to do its work. Even the heart is made up of muscle cells, and those cells also need oxygen. So if you don't get oxygen, you can get a heart attack because the heart fails to do its work. It's not getting enough energy, not enough oxygen is reaching it. So these could be cells from any part of the body. These are called body cells, right? What is this structure here, like a railway line? This is representing our blood capillary. What are these little lines like that? That's a single layer of cells that makes up the wall of your blood capillary. So this one in yellow is making up the wall of the blood capillary here, right? What are these little things like red coins inside? Those are your red blood cells. Why are they red? They're carrying oxygen. What pigment is it made up of? It's called hemoglobin. And you can see now that the heart takes the oxygen from the lung and it pumps it to the capillaries between the body cells. So our cells must get now oxygen like a road. And the road and the truck comes with all the stock. And then the truck must drop off all the goods to the shops. So all the shops are like your cells, and they must take the goods. What good must they take? They must take the oxygen. And all the packaging and the waste product, all the plastics and cardboards they don't need, is like your CO2 must go back and the truck must take it away. So here's the road. That's your blood capillaries. Okay? That's your, there's your, on the truck itself they have a carrier. The carrier at the back carries all the goods. So the truck itself is like your blood capillary, and the carriers at the behind it that it carries is your red blood cells, and it's carrying the goods called the oxygen in the form of oxyhemoglobin. And then here's your little shops here, which are called your cells, and then the oxygen is going to move from the blood to the cells for respiration. And then when it uses it up, what are the cells going to give off? CO2. CO2 is going to move now out of the cells, right, and into the blood. And then the blood takes away that CO2, which is called deoxygenated blood, to the heart. And the heart will pump the CO2 to the lungs, and we exhale it. So what is this diagram showing you? This diagram is showing you gaseous exchange between the blood and the cells. Remember, this one showed you gaseous exchange between the alveolus in the lung and the blood. And this one is showing you gaseous exchange between the blood and the cells, and the cells and the blood. Why do I say, look at this one. This one is showing you gaseous exchange from the lungs to the blood and from the blood to the lungs. It's showing you gaseous exchange from the blood to the lungs and gaseous exchange from the lungs to the blood. Can you see? Blood to lungs, lungs to blood. And this one is showing you gaseous exchange between blood to cells and cells to blood. Look at it. Oxygen coming in, moving from the blood to the cells, and then the yellow one is showing you carbon dioxide moving from the cells to the blood. And then this blood goes to the heart, heart pumps it to the lungs, and we exhale that oxygen. So let's look at what is written here. Cells will have a high carbon dioxide due to cellular respiration. So if you want to know where is the CO2 coming from in the cells, because of respiration or cellular respiration in the mitochondria, which is our powerhouse. They give us energy and they release a waste called CO2. Right, this carbon dioxide or CO2 moves out of the cells. You can see the yellow arrow. It's moving out of the cells and it's going by diffusion. That's the process how it moves. It moves into the blood. You can see this little line there, into the blood, and then it's going from the blood to the heart, and then the heart pumps it to the lungs, and then that CO2 is going to be exhaled. Carbon dioxide is transported from the cells. Right, here again, carbon dioxide is transported from the cells to the blood and from the blood to the lungs where it is exhaled. See, carbon dioxide is transported from the cells, right, and then it goes to the blood. Blood brings it to the alveoli, and the alveoli will then remove it by exhalation. Okay. Most of the carbon dioxide, now what form? In what form is carbon dioxide transported in the blood? What form? We know oxygen is transported in the form of oxyhemoglobin. And in what two forms will I see carbon dioxide? It will be transported as in the blood plasma, that is in the liquid of the blood. So your blood is a liquid and oxygen is dissolved in that liquid. Okay? And it's also the carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide will be traveling in the liquid of the blood called plasma. So that's how carbon dioxide is going to be transported in the plasma. It's going to be dissolved. And also carbon dioxide is coming in the form of bicarbonate ions. So if you look at your blood is slightly alkali, it's slightly bitter because of carbon dioxide present. So the carbon dioxide is in the form of bicarbonate ions. Okay, this is the bicarbonate ion, and you can see the C and the O there. So this makes our blood slightly alkali. So carbon dioxide is carried in two forms, dissolved in the liquid of the blood called plasma and in the form of bicarbonate ions, whereas oxygen is carried only in one form, and that is in the form of oxyhemoglobin. Right. The air in the alveoli is exhaled with more carbon dioxide than the air that is inhaled. And let's hope it will always be like that. When we breathe in, the air that we breathe in must have more oxygen than CO2. And the air that we breathe out will always have more CO2. But what's most important is that the air we inhale must have more oxygen. But if we cut down trees, eventually the air we breathe in will have more carbon dioxide than oxygen. Then all the organs in the body can fail because they don't have enough oxygen. So you have, this section is taught to you for you to understand that the body and living things are totally dependent on the environment, and that the environment has air and trees, and that those processes are important to sustain life. That is why you need to learn this. You have your blood. You need to know, why is my blood red? It's carrying oxygen. If a certain part of your body turns blue, it's because there's no oxygen. There's more CO2. So when a person's body turns blue, it means there's no oxygen. They are nearing death because it's blue. There's no oxygen in them. They turn blue. Okay? So if a baby is going to be born with the umbilical cord tied around its neck, it turns blue and then dies because there's not enough oxygen in the lungs of that baby. It was throttled, so it can't, so it turns blue. Okay, so just understand this. If you understand certain things, you'll remember your work. Same diagram, different notes. Oxygen is mainly transported by the red blood cells. Most of the oxygen combines with a pigment called hemoglobin. Right? Where is hemoglobin found? In your red blood cells. What's another name for red blood cells? Your erythrocytes. In what form is oxygen transported? Oxyhemoglobin. Right. The oxygen is transported via the circulatory system. What's a circulatory system? The heart with its arteries and veins and capillaries. Okay, what leaves the heart is always arteries. A for artery, A for away from the heart. What comes to the heart will always be veins. Veins enter the heart and arteries move away from the heart. Okay, so this heart transports blood to organs and then gets blood from the organs. So you find that oxygen is transported via the circulatory system, the blood and his vessel, the heart and his blood vessels, to all the cells for respiration, to produce energy for the cells. Very, very important note this is. Let's read it again. Oxygen is transported mainly by the red blood cells. Most of the oxygen combines with the pigment called hemoglobin, present or found in the red blood cells. Another name for red blood cells, erythrocytes. Form in which oxygen is carried, oxyhemoglobin. Right. The oxyhemoglobin is transported by the blood system to all the cells of the body. The cells will use that oxygen for respiration to produce energy, which is called ATP, in order for the cells and for that organ to do its work. Here again you can see the blood capillary has one cell layer thick, only one cell layer. Here's your cells, and the gases moving from the blood to the cells will be oxygen, and from the cells to the blood will be carbon dioxide. Where do these capillaries or blood vessels go to? They'll go to the heart to take the CO2 to the lungs to exhale it. Where is this coming from? The oxygen is coming from the lungs to the heart. The heart is pumping the oxygen to the cells. So the heart and the lungs work together all the time. This is a diagram that is simply summarizing the entire gaseous exchange system and the transport of gases. And you can see a very simplified diagram saying that from the air, this is from the air or atmosphere, right? We have inhalation, air goes into the lungs. From the air in the lungs, there is oxygen which goes into the blood. The blood takes the oxygen to the cells for respiration. After respiration, the cells give off CO2. The CO2 can't remain in the cells. It can cause it to become poisonous. The CO2 leaves the cells by diffusion, gets into the blood. The blood is taken to the heart with the CO2. Then the CO2 is pumped from the heart to the lungs, and then we exhale that CO2 into the air. And you can see here, oxygen is continuously entering the blood at the alveoli surface. So from the alveolus in the lung, it goes into the blood. And then that oxygen is eventually going to the cells. Carbon dioxide is transported from the cells, right, from the cells of the body, where to the heart, and from the heart, the CO2 will transport it to the alveolus, where it's removed from the body. Now here is a lined diagram which often appears in the paper, and you can see your two arrows here now, then your A and B. So here, what type of blood is represented by A? the type of blood represented by A, blood coming to the lungs, will be deoxygenated. Be careful, they can switch it, they can put the arrow this way and going out that way. It's not always, the incoming arrow is not always on your left, it can also be on your right. But as long as the arrow coming in towards the alveolus here, in your blood, but alveolar, if you see this is the alveolus and the blood, and the blood coming into the arrow moving into the blood, you must know that that one is deoxygenated blood, blood rich in CO2. So that is deoxygenated blood. That's a pulmonary artery. That's deoxygenated blood. That's a pulmonary artery. The gas moving from there to the lungs will always be what? CO2. And then the gas moving from the alveolus to the blood will always be oxygen. Remember, this is the endothelium. Endothelium, one cell layer thick. This is a squamous epithelium, number 2. And number 3 is your red blood cells. So let's see. Name the type of epithelial tissue number 1 and 2. This 1 and that 2 is called the squamous epithelium. Okay? Sometimes they say endothelium, but that endothelium means the epithelium on the inside. But it's actually your squamous epithelium. So it's a thin squamous epithelium that makes up the wall of your blood vessel and the wall of your alveolus. It's called a squamous epithelium. Identify blood cell 3, that disc-shaped one. Disc-shaped, it's your red blood cells or your erythrocytes. Now, if I must label this arrow C and D, what process is shown as by C? It's going to be exhalation. What process is shown by D? It's going to be inhalation. What pigment is found in the cell mentioned in the previous question? So let's look at the previous question. Identify the blood cells number 3. These are red blood cells. And remember, what do they carry? Oxygen. What pigment do they have? Hemoglobin. So the question is, what pigment is found in the cell mentioned in the previous question? The cell mentioned there was red blood cells. So what pigment? That's the key word. It's going to be hemoglobin, right? Which type of blood enters the blood? Ask yourself, what type of blood enters the blood capillary at A? It's going to be deoxygenated blood. Blood rich in CO2. So this is blood rich in CO2. Which type of blood leaves the blood capillary at B? The type of blood leaving at B will be oxygenated blood. Okay. In which form is most of the oxygen carried in the blood? Can you see how now you can answer it? It is oxyhemoglobin. That's the form in which oxygen is carried. Oxyhemoglobin. Supply 2 structural adaptations of the alveoli which make them well suited for gaseous exchange. So if we go back to this diagram, we want to know what makes this alveolus well suited for gases to move from the blood to the alveolus, alveolus to the blood. How is it suited? First of all, you can see it's pouch-like, which means it has a large surface area for maximum diffusion of oxygen. It allows oxygen to move from all sides. Then it says if it are just straight. So if I draw something like this, you can see this has a bigger surface. So maximum oxygen can diffuse from the alveolus into the blood. So it's pouch-like. You have to say, give a statement. It's pouch-like. How is it adapted? Pouch-like to give a large surface area for maximum diffusion. Plus, its wall is made up of a single layer of cells, so it's very thin for easy diffusion. So it's thin. Any gaseous exchange surface must have 5 requirements with regards to thin. How is this suited to be thin? Single layer of squamous epithelium, so it makes it very thin for rapid diffusion, rapid movement of gases in from the blood to the alveolus, from the alveolus to the blood. So it has thin single layer of squamous epithelium for rapid or quick diffusion of gases, blood to capillary, from the alveolus to the blood and from the blood to the alveolus. Then it's pouch-like, which means a large surface area, right? You must have a large surface area. Large surface area. And how does it satisfy that adaptation of large surface area? Pouch-like, giving it a large surface area for maximum diffusion of gases. Then any gas exchange surface must be moist. Can you see this little layer on the inside of the alveolus? There's a layer of moisture. And how do we know it? If you breathe against even a mirror or a glass, you find steam comes out. That means our lungs are not dry. It has a layer of moisture. So it's moist, and that's very important because gases always move in a dissolved form. So it's moist so that gases are always diffusing from a dissolved form. Right. Otherwise, they won't be able to move. They have to be dissolved, and then they move out easily to the membranes. So it has a layer of moisture so that gases can enter and leave in a dissolved form. All right. So large surface area, thin. Then you have something called close contact. Okay. Close contact means that the alveolus and the blood capillary, they're not far apart. They're very close to each other, almost touching each other. Right. So there's a close contact for rapid diffusion of gases. So large surface area, thin, moist, and close contact. Those are the four most important parts of anything to be well suited for gaseous exchange. And also you can say a transport system. You can also say transport system. In other words, if gases move in and out, who's bringing it in and who's going to take it away? There has to be a transport system. So the only transport system we have in our body is our blood vessels, which is your veins, your arteries, and your fine capillaries near your cells. So transport. And does this have a transport system? Yes. The blood capillary is close contact with the alveolus. Can you see? The blood capillary has a close contact for rapid diffusion. Single layer of cells makes it very thin for rapid diffusion. Layer of moisture makes the gases move in a dissolved form. Right? Large is pouch-like for maximum diffusion of gases. So supply two structural adaptations of the alveoli, which makes it well suited for gases to move in and out. The alveolus is rounded or pouch-like to increase the surface area. It has a thin lining or squamous epithelium for rapid diffusion of gases. It is richly supplied with blood capillaries to transport the gases. It is moist for gases to enter easily or in a solution or a dissolved form. Okay, so here it is increased surface area, then you have thin, then you have a transport system, then you have moist, and then they also can say close contact. Both the alveolus and the blood capillary are in close contact for gases to move in and out very, very easily. Describe how carbon dioxide is exchanged at the cellular level and transported to the lungs. So, how is carbon dioxide exchanged at a cellular level and transported to the lungs? Now, learners, here you need to know. Here's your cells, and they have a mitochondria, okay? And here's your blood capillaries. So, after cells are respiring, they are releasing CO2. So, they're going to give out, they have more CO2 in the cells than in the blood, because that's where respiration occurs. So, there's a high concentration of CO2 in the cell. See, cells will have a high carbon dioxide concentration because of respiration. Okay, now we're putting these words into a picture. These cells will produce lots of CO2 due to respiration. The carbon dioxide moves out of the cells. Can you see it's moving out by diffusion into the blood? So from there, it's going to go into the blood. Most of the carbon dioxide is transported in the plasma and as bicarbonate ions. So it's going to be transported here as plasma and also as bicarbonate ions. Then this blood capillaries will all go to where? It's going to go to your heart, right? And the heart is going to pump it where to? It's going to pump it to your lungs. And then your lungs is going to exhale that CO2. Can you see now? Describe how carbon dioxide is exchanged at the cellular level and transported to the lungs. So if you see this picture, you'll say, after cellular respiration in the cells, more CO2 moves out of the cells and then into the blood. The blood then takes the CO2, which is deoxygenated blood, to the lungs, and the lungs will exhale that CO2 out of the body. Right. Discuss the gaseous exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the alveolus. So now they want to know, here's my alveolus and here's my blood. Now how does oxygen and CO2 move from the alveolus and the blood? So you're going to say the air entering the alveolus has a high concentration of oxygen. Remember now, oxygen comes in from the air to the lungs. Né? So the alveolus is going to have a high concentration of oxygen, right, compared to the blood. Now there's less oxygen here. So more blood enters the alveolus from the air, more oxygen in the alveolus compared to the blood. This results in oxygen diffusing or moving from the alveolus into the blood, where it's low. So it's going to move from high concentration in the alveolus to a low concentration in the blood. The inhaled air has less CO2. Now what's going to happen now? Here now CO2 is coming into the blood. So there's more CO2 in the blood than in the alveolus. And then the carbon dioxide will move from a high concentration in the blood to the alveolus and it's going to be exhaled. You see? And it's going to move out of the body. Here is a table and this table shows you the composition of air. What gases are found in the air that we inhale and exhale. The difference in composition of three main gases after exercise and while sleeping. So remember, the inhaled air always has nitrogen, and you can see whether you're sleeping or exercising, nitrogen is fixed because we do not use nitrogen. So the inhaled air and the exhaled air will have that nitrogen because it's not used. Right, oxygen, we inhale 21%, but when we exhale, there's 16% exhaled, which means we used 5% for what? For respiration. Exhaled air from a person who is exercising. When you exercise, can you see you took in 21%, but you exhaled less air with less oxygen. Why? Because when you exercise, you need more oxygen. And therefore, the air that you exhale will have less oxygen because you're going to use more. You're going to use 4% more oxygen. When you are exercising, you're going to use 4% more because you need energy. Oxygen you need for respiration to give you energy. Your muscles are working, they'll use up. So a sleeping person will use less oxygen and an active person will use more. Can you see the difference? 21 minus 16 is 5. 21 minus 12 is going to be 9. Okay, so you will have only 9% exhale there. Carbon dioxide, when we inhale carbon dioxide, there must always be 0,04. There's less carbon dioxide in the air, and that's because of the plants. The plants are absorbing the CO2 that we exhale, okay, and keeping it minimum, because carbon dioxide, if you inhale, is a poisonous gas. You cannot inhale a lot of it, right? So when the carbon dioxide in the inhaled air is less, but when we exhale it, it's more, because we are getting it from respiration. But you see, a person who's exercising, they have more respiration, they'll produce more CO2 in the exhaled air. So a person who's exercising, they were more active, they'll pump out more air with more CO2. But if you're resting, you're not so active, when you exhale, you'll pump out air with less CO2. The air in the atmosphere is made up of nitrogen, oxygen, and carbon dioxide, some water vapor, and some other gases, right, which we are inactive. Inhaled air has the same composition as the atmospheric air, but it's different to the exhaled air. So when you inhale air, right, it will have the same gases, but when you exhale it, the gases, the amount of the gas will change. When you exhale it, you'll see now there's less oxygen and there's more CO2. And when you inhale the gas, there's more oxygen and less CO2. Okay. Nitrogen is not used in the human body. That's why you can see it never change. Oxygen is used by the cells. You can see the difference. And carbon dioxide is produced because of respiration and must be removed from the cells. So when you exercise, you produce more CO2, and when you're sleeping, you produce less CO2. Okay. What is the difference between the percentage of oxygen inhaled and exhaled from a sleeping person? You can see when you inhale, the oxygen is 21, and when you exhale, it's 16, which means you used only 5. And whereas in a person who's exercising, they used 9. Okay, they used more. What is the percentage of oxygen used by the body in each inhalation of a person who is exercising? So the percentage is 21 minus 12. The person who is exercising used actually 9% oxygen, and when you're sleeping, you used 5. Give a reason for your answer. A person who's exercising is more active and requires more energy, therefore more oxygen is used. Here is a simple experiment where we put clear lime water, and then if you blow into clear lime water, it becomes milky, and that is a test to test for CO2. So if you want to know really I'm breathing out CO2, that's clear lime water. When you breathe out and you're not smoking anything, how come it turns cloudy? It's because of CO2. So that normal water turns milky in the presence of, clear lime water turns milky in the presence of CO2. Also remember that the air we exhaled, because it's coming from within the body is warmer, 37.5, we have a higher temperature, right, or between 36.8 and 37.5, that's the normal body temperature. So because our body is warmer and hotter than the air that we exhale always has a higher temperature. Lime water is a chemical used to demonstrate that CO2 is exhaled from the human body. Lime water turns milky white when air is breathed into it. The effect of exercise on breathing and pulse rate. Right, here's the brain, and you're going to learn of this in grade 12, right? That is the cerebellum, that's the spinal cord, that's the medulla oblongata, and this is the one that you need to know with regards to gaseous exchange. Just above the spine, the spinal cord, is a little part behind your neck here called the medulla oblongata. This medulla oblongata controls your breathing rate and your heart rate. So if this medulla oblongata is damaged, that means it will not control the beating of your heart. That means the heart will not be able to pump oxygen to all cells of the body. Organs will fail. and also it will not be able to send messages to the lung muscles to contract and relax. You will not be able to inhale oxygen. There will be no respiration and death can occur. So remember, breathing is controlled by the center called the medulla oblongata in the brain. When a person actively exercises, right, when you exercise, your rate and your depth of breathing increases. That means your inhalation and exhalation become shorter and more rapid. And who's controlling your breathing rate is your medulla oblongata. This is the same table again. It shows the results from an experiment where 2 learners recorded their heart rates and breathing rates. What center in the brain controls it? Medulla oblongata controls heart rate and breathing rate. At rest, after walking up and down 2 sets of stairs and running up and down. So these 2 learners were resting, walking and running, resting, walking and running. Okay? And then they wanted to find out what is the aim of the investigation. This is to determine the effect of exercise on your breathing rate and your heart rate. Okay? So you can see that when a person is at rest, it's 68 and 72 in these 2 learners. When they're walking, you can see the heart rate when you're walking. Automatically here, you can see when you're walking, it never changed. But learner 2, when he was walking, his heart rate increased. And you can see here, learner 2, his heart rate also increased. But learner 1, his heart rate is not as high as learner 2. Breathing rate, you can see here at rest, the breathing rate is the same when you're resting, right? Walking, and when you're running, you actually, your breathing rate will increase, okay? Your breathing rate increases here, and you can see also here where it's stable, but the minute you start exercising, your breathing rate and your heart rate increases. So the most important thing about this is that when you are active, your breathing rate and your heart rate will increase to bring in more oxygen for energy and to get rid of the excess CO2 after respiration. Okay, what do you observe happened to the heart rate of both learners after running? Both their heart rates increased. Okay, they increased to over 100 beats per minute. 100 beats per minute. Now, what do you observe happened to the breathing rate of both learners after running up the stairs? So when they were running, so although here it may be the same, but the minute they ran, the breathing rate increased from 12 to 16 and from 12 to 14. So in conclusion here, what happened to the breathing rate of both learners after running up the stairs? Breathing rate, you look at that table, it increased. Right, same diagram, same table again. Write a conclusion that can be drawn from the above experiment. Learners' heart rates and breathing rates increased from rest to running. Walking up the stairs did not result in a change of the breathing rate. So when they walked up the stairs, their breathing rate didn't change. But the minute they started running and became more active, the breathing rate and the heart rate increased. And that is all we have, learners. So if you can now understand gaseous exchange between alveolus and blood between blood and cells, the forms in which oxygen is carried, the forms in which carbon dioxide is carried, the reason why we produce CO2 from the cells, the reason why we need more oxygen, know what is oxygen carried in the form of hemoglobin, oxyhemoglobin, the pigment, the blood vessel, which one brings oxygenated blood, which one leaves carrying deoxygenated blood. And remember that the heart with all its blood vessels forms the circulatory system, which is going to be the next actual topic, right, when we deal with the kidney, and we're also going to look at the heart again. So thank you, learners. Please study and do well in your exams.